So I'm out here in the beautiful Peak District waiting for my brew to boil, and I'm out with the 8-18 Lumix Leica, and I've coveted this lens for a hot minute. Since my 9-18 Olympus died in Madeira last year, I've been really struggling because I don't have a wide angle lens. I have high hopes and I've already got some nice photos so far, yet I think I'm a little bit in love with it. But I'm gonna have a brew and then go get some more photos. The Lumix Leica 8-18mm is weather sealed and the build quality is lovely. It's quite a large lens for micro four thirds, but it's certainly very portable and it's not something that's going to weigh you down. It's f2.8 to f4, but we have the 2.8 where we want it at the wide end, and it's certainly a heck of a lot faster than my beloved 9-18mm Olympus lens. The lens itself isn't stabilised, but if your camera body is stabilised you won't have any issues, and I've always found that wider angle lenses are a lot more forgiving when it comes to stability. I really love the versatility that the focal length gives you. At the long end we have a 35mm-ish full frame equivalent, so when you're out and about doing street photography or landscapes and you want to take more of a conventional shot where the wide angle isn't appropriate, you can just switch between the two and you don't have to change your lenses quite so often because it is quite a versatile focal length. It's not quite as versatile as the incredible Lumix 10-25 f1.7, which is just a feat of engineering. I don't even understand how that lens exists, and you could say that that's probably the main competitor for this lens. So that will give you a lot more versatility again, though it isn't quite as wide. I found the image quality to be superb and sharp and punchy throughout the frame, even into the corners, and you would hope so really with it having the Leica badge. I think the Leica badge is well earned in this scenario. I think the images are sharp and beautiful, and you don't have to strap it down very far, if at all, to still get those pin sharp images. The barrel distortion is very, very minimal and very, very manageable, so it'd be great for interior shots and things where you don't want your perception of lines to be skewed too much. And while I do covet this lens for vlogging, I thought I'd whack it in 8mm and see how it looks. I haven't got my tripod, so I'm just holding it by hand, and it seems really nice. I'm going to walk a little bit and I'm on very unsteady terrain and there's no stabilisation in the lens, so hopefully this isn't too bouncy. Usually at 8mm it's quite forgiving. One thing to keep in mind with most wide angle lenses is your flares. Because you are shooting such a wide angle it can get a little bit wayward, but it's certainly not the worst lens I've ever used for this. It's very manageable in this instance, and you do get a very hefty lens hood with this lens as standard, so I would recommend using it. And it's certainly not as bad as the Lumix 7-14 because that has the rounded front element, so when light hits that in a certain way we get all kinds of crazy flares. So this is much more manageable than that, but do keep an eye out if this is a lens that you're going to use facing the sun or bright light sources. So I really like the rocks here and the mountain top in the background, and I'm just trying to find a composition where they look balanced together. So I want the eye to go from one to the other in the frame, and using the wide angle lens here is really helpful. So it's usually just a matter of walking around using the rule of thirds on my camera to try and get as much balance as possible. I love people for scale. It's like they were posing then, it was amazing. So who is this lens for? I think it's brilliant for vlogging and video in general. I think it was a very nice focal length to vlog and hold handheld, and because the image is so sharp you can punch in quite detailed with your video and not worry about barrel distortion or anything going wayward with the image. I think it's a very strong optical lens, and you've got a lot of versatility when it comes to punching in video and photography. So for vlogging and walking about and filming bits and bobs where you might want to punch in a bit, you're absolutely sorted. It'd be great for interior photography. I think it's perfect for cityscapes. I had an absolute ball going around Liverpool with this lens. I think it'd be great for your architecture and for street photography as well, if you do like the wider side of street photography. I think it'd be ideal for astrophotography as well, because you have such a wide angle lens and the 2.8 aperture means you'll have bags of time to get light into the camera before the stars start to shift. And of course, landscape photography. Though I think it's a good all-rounder, to be honest, because you've got your 18mm long end, which is 35mm and quite standard, and then your wide angle properties as well, so good for a heck of a lot of things. With your landscape photography though, do beware. I think a lot of people, sometimes beginner photographers, think landscape need a wide angle lens to get all the stuff into the camera. And it's really sometimes the opposite. I really enjoy shooting landscapes with longer lenses. But the wide angle focal length does have its place in landscape photography. You've got to use it to its advantages. And those advantages are using it for perspectives that you can't get with a standard lens. So you can get really, really close to the foreground and keep the background in the frame. And you can get a lot of really interesting sorts of compositions with a wide angle lens. The other thing it's great for is emphasizing leading lines and showing the scope and grandeur of places. However, sometimes when you're using a wide angle lens for landscape photography, all of the good stuff gets kind of lost on the horizon and gets really small in the frame. So do use it sparingly and make sure you are consciously choosing your compositions to emphasize those wide angle attributes rather than having it work against you. The Lumix 8-18mm does take filters, so that's perfect for landscape photography, and if you want to use a polarizer or any filters that you enjoy using, you can use on this lens. And the competitor, the Lumix 7-14mm, can't actually take filters because of its rounded front element. So point to the Lumix Leica. The Lumix 8-18 is also internal focusing, which means the length of the lens doesn't change when you change focal length. This is ideal for gimbal work because you can change your focal length without having to rebalance the camera. I've had an absolute blast using this lens so far, and I think I've only just started to tap into its potential. I think it could be something that stays in my bag and is used over and over and over again for the foreseeable. And I love it, I think, even more than my beloved Olympus 9-18, which has become a little bit faulty in its old age. However, for the price difference between the Olympus 9-18 and this lens, it really is a consideration of how much wide-angle photography or videography you want to use. If it's only going to be occasionally, maybe the Olympus will be a much better choice for you because it's cheaper and it does a very, very good job. If this is something that you want to invest heavily in, you know, the Lumix Leica 8-18 is stunning. As I mentioned earlier, you have to consider the Lumix 10-25. It's not as wide, but it's very, very versatile. But I think it's a little bit heavier and also a little bit more expensive. So options, options, options. I'm all for options. I think there'll be a right lens for you. If you'd like to learn more about the Olympus 9-18 and all of its cons, but all of its pros, I'm kind of in love with that lens even though it's a weird one, check out the review here.